Hello guys, and welcome back to the Homemade Edition. Today we're going to look at the Martini and a couple of variations. Before we get started, it is standard operating procedure for a lot of people to have their preferred recipe and kind of hate on anything that's not that. Today we're not going to do that. I'm going to show you guys what I like to do when I'm at home and I'm not trying to impress anybody, as well as give you guys a few tips and tricks and ideas of how you could adapt it to things that are more available in your area or more suited to your tastes. Without any further ado, let's make these drinks. Okay, so we're going to start with the gin martini, which is the original style of martini. I've got three different kinds of gin here. I've got a London Dry, I've got an American style, and I've also got an Irish rose gin. Now, talking about the flavor of these, this one is going to be a little bit more juniper forward and the most commonly available. This one is representative of any kind of gin that is still clear, it's not sweet, but is less heavy on the juniper, maybe has more citrusy notes. So sometimes it's called like a new age gin, sometimes it's called an American gin, depends on what company you're going with. This is Aviation, which is made a couple hours down the road from me, so it's relatively cheap and always available. May not be true in your area. And then this is something I picked up on my honeymoon. This is rose gin, which is a traditional style of gin. It just has a little bit, how did Sarah describe it? A pretty taste to it, which is not just because it's pink. If you taste it, it kind of has this beautiful rose flavor. You could use any one of these, but the original would be a London Dry style, so that's what we're going to stick with today. Okay, so we've got our gin picked out, but now we have to figure out what kind of vermouth we're going to use. Of course, we want to use a dry vermouth, and I have a couple of options here. These are both French. We have Doulin, probably they'd pronounce it more Doulin, and Noilly Prat, or again, the French pronunciation would be Noilly Prat. Supposedly this is a little bit different than what you'll find overseas, but both of these are relatively available across America. If you can't find one, you probably can find the other or both. I know that I like this one better than Martini and Rossi, and I've heard really good things about Noilly Prat. So today we're going to try this one for the gin martini. And then last but not least, and definitely almost always forgotten, you need some orange bitters, specifically Regan's. There are other brands of orange bitters out there, but this is the gold standard. This is what's been used in the martini since its creation. And if you use a less than ideal orange bitters, it's not going to add very much to the drink. It's actually just going to make it taste cheap and weird, and it's not going to blend well with the gin and the vermouth. But enough talk about ingredients. Let's actually get into the recipe and mix this up. So the first thing you need to know about actually mixing this up is that you want to mix it, not shake it. If you shake it, you'll add more water into the drink, and it's really easy to stir. I have here a specific cocktail stirring glass, which is heavily weighted at the bottom so that it will stay still during the mixing process. But you could actually just use the carafe from a French press if you clean it out thoroughly. Okay, so the specific recipe is going to be 2 ounces of gin, 1 ounce of vermouth, and 2 dashes of orange bitters. We're actually going to build it in reverse order, and we're going to talk about it as we go. So the orange bitters, again, just 2 dashes into your glass. 1, 2. Now the vermouth here is fresh, as you can hear, and well, that smells really good. And this is important. If you're going to do a recipe like this where you have 2 parts gin and 1 part vermouth, you need to be using fresh vermouth because the vermouth flavor will kind of change, become more bitter and a little bit weird if you keep it longer than 6 weeks, and especially if you don't refrigerate it. You need to keep your vermouth in the fridge. Pro tip. All right, so 1 ounce of our dry vermouth. Go. And then 2 ounces of our Beefeater gin. Now, we're building it in this particular order of ingredients because we are starting with the smallest amount first and the least expensive first. So that way, if we make a mistake, we are throwing out the least expensive ingredients rather than the most expensive ingredients. Okay, we need some ice. Now I've made some nice clear ice here that is very, very solid. It has no air pockets in it, and that's why it's so clear. I'm going to start with a more fragile looking piece, and I'm going to crack that over my mixing glass so that we get some small pieces of ice to add a little bit of dilution to the drink, but not too much, which can easily happen when you're using normal ice. If you guys are wondering how do you make clear ice at home, I have a video on that. Just click the link in the pinned comment below. Okay, so we've got our ice. Now we're just going to give this a stir for about 30 to 45 seconds. You can lift up the ice a little bit and let it back down, and that will help combine the ingredients and also give you an idea of how diluted the drink is becoming. Alright, that should be cold enough. Now, it's traditional to serve your martini in a coupe glass, and since my martini glasses are actually half-sized, we're going to be using a coupe glass today. Strain it. You want to strain all of your ice chips out of the drink. And then the last element that you need for this is some sort of a citrus peel to go on the edge as a garnish. People think that garnishes like that are just for looks, but they actually add a lot of flavor to the drink through your sense of smell. Most of your sense of taste is actually through your olfactory nerve, which is your sense of smell. So adding that to the drink actually completely changes the flavors that are there. I said citrus, but traditionally it would be an orange twist. Today I'm gonna go with lemon, just because lemon is really good. So take, and if you're using a Swiss peeler or this little strip peeler, you want to do it over the drink so that you are expressing some of those citrus oils onto the drink, not too much. And then you can coil it up a little bit. It's a little easier said than done. And just lay it over the edge like that. And there you have the classic, not the original, but pretty close to the original martini recipe. So let's give it a taste and see how it is. So there's this butteriness from the vermouth that I think combines really nicely with the botanicals and the gin, and you get that little pop of lemon and orange playing off that as well. It's very light on the citrus, but it's there. And that's what I was saying about using fresh vermouth versus old vermouth. It has this buttery, rich flavor to it that gets lost pretty quickly, especially if you don't refrigerate it or if you're using something honestly really, really cheap. So let's set this aside. Okay, so the vodka martini is so popular nowadays that people think that that is actually just the standard martini. And if it is in your world, then that's fine. But this was kind of invented in the 1950s, and it was originally called a kangaroo cocktail, not a martini, because it's only a 2-ingredient cocktail. Because remember, our classic martini actually has that orange bitters in there. Whereas a vodka martini is just vodka and vermouth. I have a couple different kinds of vodka here. This is a grain vodka and this is a potato vodka. Now, if you want a very, very clean tasting vodka that doesn't have a lot of additional flavors, I would go with something like this. This is an American made vodka called Waving Plains, and this is made from 100% corn. This is pretty cheap, but very, very smooth, very good vodka. This is made in Connecticut, I believe. This is Blair & Boyd potato vodka. Potato adds a really interesting extra thickness to the texture, not like syrupy, but kind of headed in that direction a little bit, and it has more flavor to it, and it's generally distilled less than, or to a lower proof than a grain vodka, so it's a much more interesting spirit. When I'm gonna make a vodka martini at home, I use a potato vodka. I don't really care about the brand, I care about the flavor that's in it, which is primarily coming from your base grain or potato. So let's make this drink. Now, even the best vodka has a less strong flavor profile compared to gin, so we're gonna change up our ratio a little bit. Remember, there's no bitters, and instead of doing a full ounce of vermouth, we are actually going to do 3/4 ounce. And I'm gonna use the Dolin vermouth because I feel like it's a little bit fruitier and a little bit less punch you in the mouth flavor compared to the Noilly Prat. So this I think will pair a lot better with the more subtle flavor of vodka, but your mileage may vary. 3/4 ounce of our vermouth. Again, we're gonna do this in the mixing glass. We're not gonna shake this. I don't care what James Bond says, and yes, we are gonna come back to James Bond in a little bit, so hold that thought. And then we're gonna do 2¼ ounces. We'll actually start with the quarter because why not? And this is giving us a 3:1 ratio of our vodka to vermouth as opposed to the 2:1 ratio of our gin martini. And you want a 3:1 ratio with vodka because it's just not as strong of a flavor profile. It doesn't stand up to the vermouth quite as well, and it's a little bit more subtle, so we don't want to just overpower it with a 2:1 ratio, which a London Dry Gin can easily stand up to, and if you're using fresh vermouth, is amazing. But this is 3:1. Oh, I can smell that potato vodka already. It is, if you've never had potato vodka, it is worth the price of admission on that. It's a whole nother spirit. If you've never had it, if you've only ever had grain vodka, it's gonna blow your mind. Give this a nice stir, combine everything. Now, for garnish, it would be traditional in a vodka martini to use an olive or a couple green olives to your taste as the garnish. I hate American green olives. When I was in Morocco about 6 years ago, I tried a bunch of the local olives and they were amazing. And I realized that I don't hate olives, I just hate commercially produced, canned, jarred olives here in the US. So I'm gonna kind of do my own thing here on the garnish because I'm not going to garnish this with something that's correct. I'm going to garnish it with something I actually want in my drink. So what I'm using are homemade garlic dill green beans, or affectionately called dilly beans. This is my mother's recipe, and personally I would take that any day over a normal canned olive. Let's give this a taste. Oh yeah, that is so refreshing. When you use a potato vodka like that, it doesn't have the same sharp edges that any kind of grain vodka is going to have. I would put this up against any grain vodka. I don't care if you spend $75, $150 a bottle, it doesn't matter. This is only a $30 bottle of vodka, but because it's made from potato, it is just exquisite. And I think that the Dolan Vermouth was a really good choice here. I think the Noilly Prat would be fine, but it's a little bit stronger, like I said. So I would recommend the Dolan for a vodka martini. All right, so we saved the most complicated and the most controversial and the most fun martini for last. We're gonna do the Vesper Martini. Now, the Vesper is kind of a bridge between these two cocktails right here. We're gonna change some things a little bit from the way James Bond orders it in Casino Royale, and I'll explain why, and it will make sense, trust me. So, Bond orders his martini, and the bartender's about to walk away, and then he says, wait, I want 3 measures of Gordon's gin, 1 measure of vodka, half a measure of Quina Lillet, shake it over ice and serve it with a thick lemon peel. The problem with that is a freaking enormous drink, and I have other stuff I need to do today. So we're gonna cut that recipe in half. And then the second problem with that recipe is that it's shaken. It's not James Bond who's wrong there, it's Ian Fleming, the guy who created James Bond. He doesn't know what he's talking about. It may have been really, really fun to have your spy character always say, shaken, not stirred. But there's no point in doing that. We're not mixing a simple syrup or something like that together with our spirit, so there's no point in violently shaking it together. There's no fruit juice. It's just spirits and aperitif wine. It will mix beautifully in a mixing glass. There's no point in bringing out the shaker tin. And then finally, you can't get Quina Lillet anymore. Lillet is a French aperitif company, and their Quina Lillet had quinine in it, but they stopped making it back in the 80s. They now make Lillet Blanc, but it doesn't have that quinine flavor in it. So there are two options you can go with to sort of recreate that. The easiest to find is going to be cookie Americano, and you'll see here I have one of these vacuum wine corks here for keeping it in the fridge, so that's the best way to store it. This is pretty good, it's pretty sweet, but the other option, which might be a little bit harder to find, and I have not tried before, but I've heard so many good things, is the Tempus Fugit Quino Liero d'Or. And this is kind of the gold standard for recreating the Vesper cocktail and the gold standard for creating any cocktail that calls for quinoa lillet. So we're going to try this today and I am super excited. Now, like I said, we're going to cut our recipe in half. So instead of 3 measures, 1 measure, and a half measure, which would easily be translated into 3 ounces, 1 ounce, and a half ounce, we are going to do 1.5 ounces of gin. We're going to do 1/2 ounce of vodka and 1/4 ounce of our Quino Liero d'Or. So we're going to start with, again, the smallest and cheapest measurement first. Yeah, I think this is going to be better than the Koki. Nothing wrong with Koki, but this has a little bit more going on. I'm excited for this. All right, so 1/4 ounce. 1/2 ounce of our vodka. Again, we're rocking the potato vodka. And 1.5 ounces of our gin. Give this a nice stir. So there's a little bit less volume in this cocktail versus the other two, but that's because we took a recipe that was almost double sized and cut it in half, so it's slightly less than the same size of one normal martini. Last thing we want to do is add our thick slice of lemon. Getting garnishes to stay is like one of the things that I'm not very good at, but you know, whatever. Let's try this. Man, so I gotta say, I won't be making this with Cocchi Americano anymore. I like the Quino Liero d'Or a little bit better. It's less sweet, and I think that's what I like about it. But let's compare these three now. The original. Yeah, again with the Noilly Prat vermouth, very buttery. It actually it really works with the strong juniper flavor in the Beefeater. I really like that. Going back to our vodka. Yeah, and that one, again, you taste that earthy, I don't even know how to describe the flavor that you get from the potato vodka. I think it's best described by saying go buy a nice bottle of potato vodka and taste it yourself. That is, wow, so different but so delicious. And then coming back around to James Bond. Yeah. So there you have it. We have 3 different, very different martini recipes. They all have something in common, but they all taste very different. You can take these recipes, you can tweak them by changing your ratios, by changing what specific ingredients you put into them, and make them your own. Let me know in the comments if you tried these, which one you liked better, which one you didn't really care for, and what kind of spirits you're using. If you want to find out how to make clear ice, check out the link in the pinned comment below. If you guys want to see content like this before the rest of the world and help me make more of it, follow the link to Patreon in the video description. And don't forget to check out all of my other channels. Subscribe and hit the like button because likes are free. My name is Luke Wallstead. This has been the Homemade Edition, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.